Got the 64 gig one.
Yeah, this is the everything drifter, right?
Yep.
Okay, good, because I was going to be really angry if I went down all those stairs.
Otherwise, it would have probably been better to check before you came there.
Well, I was pretty sure, but you know. Well, the hilarious thing was they were sitting there talking about the 24th and 25th Omar Crusade. And we got 25th Omar Crusade against the Drifters. Right?
Yeah, I'll give you that.
I mean, they certainly have motive now. I just want to know how to kill one. I have a sports scuttle at this point.
That's an eerie sudden silence.
Kind of more than a few than I was hoping for, or rather I should say this is about the number I'd hoped for. Okay, can neither see nor hear you. Say again.
Can you wait just a little bit?
Absolutely. Hello, I'm Makoto Priano with the Arataka Research Consortium, and I'm assuming you're all here because you're curious about drifters, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions and provide you some more information. I'm joined on stage currently by Nava Idios with Phoenix Naval Systems, who has also done both drifter incursions and hives, and I believe Onslaughter with Pandemic Legion will be trying to sneak in a little bit, and he has also participated in this. So they're here to correct my inevitable mistakes, to heckle me, of course, and also to help with Q&A, as they are quite knowledgeable. Just to let you know, this is a half-hour presentation. If we run short on time, then there will be an informal Q&A outside. And of course, this is my first time speaking in front of a crowd this size, so if I free it up, do throw something at me. I promise that everyone can. Thank you. I'll be happy to help. Oh, it's nice and soft too. Very nice. So, today's plan. We're going to deal with, in the first place, why the drifters are a big deal, the lore of the drifters, how, or what their strengths are, how we deal with those strengths, where to find and engage drifters, what we get for engaging them, what's coming for the drifters so far as we know, because obviously CCP plays very well with this, and then any remaining time will be used for questions. On with the show. So one of the questions that must be asked, why are drifters why are they important? Why do they matter? I'm sure they're a curiosity, sure people are interested in them, but they don't really do much outside of, small areas where they happen to congregate and wander around. For me, the single most important element of the drifter is its AI, and this is because it's an AI test bed. Drifters, you'll see warping from waypoint to waypoint in system. They'll chase and station camp people that aggress them. For a period of time, there were actually Game King players that had Intosis links fitted in Namar space after the release of Intosis links. This appears to be sort of a test bed, possibly of a customs functionality. And also we see NPC versus NPC combat with drifters, which is something that's not very common in games generally, and of course is completely new for EVE, and it's fairly exciting. We saw this, of course, in the environments around Safazon, and also with drifter incursions. Lastly, we also see with drifters the first instances of non-combat activity. They salvage, they scan, they jump wormholes, they interact with the world in a way that isn't just shooting it, which is promising for what's going to come with this AI. Of course, they matter more than just the terms of the AI. They are important sort of to the PvE meta. And normally we don't talk of meta in a PvE term, but it is relevant because EVE's PvE sort of has a reputation for being a little bit less engaging than would be ideal. So, as a new faction, they don't necessarily comply with the norms or the rules of other factions in EVE. They're able to break existing norms, whether it's having multi-layer shields, whether it's the Doomsday, whether it's simply their behavior as an AI testbed. And because of all this, they also force people to deal with NPCs in a way that's a little bit more diverse than, oh, it's a red chevron, I'll shoot it. As many of us probably have heard with stories of courtmates or alliance mates who've just sort of shot the red chevron and then lost like a Navy Raven or whatever. And that is, of course, very important for EVE. Of course, because they are potentially lethal, people tend to avoid drifters. They don't want to engage them. And ideally, with this presentation today, we will break out of that mold and provide people a little bit more confidence in fighting the drifter. Of course, they're important for more than just the PvE meta. Obviously, they are an important factor in the storyline of EVE. We see, for instance, in the case of Silent Battlegrounds, there are a pair of unknown wrecks. In addition to the destroyed Revenant and the sleeper rooms, we suspect that the drifters have been involved in fighting against Sancha. We, of course, also see unknown wrecks and superior sleeper caches, which imply possibly that it's the drifters that have been raiding old sleeper stockpiles for equipment. Obviously, they tie in with Carolyn Starr and Telecan Technology, given their arising immediately after Carolyn Starr. And obviously, they also tie into why we are here for this event, or at least for the Friday night fight, with their assassination of Empress Jamil I. So, needless to say, that's an important storyline element. And of course, in what's coming, we also see that drifters will be making more of an appearance in wormhole space generally with their appearance in C5 and C6 combat sites. And from CCP Affinity statement at Vegas, we know that they're coming to the defense of the sleepers, possibly whether the sleepers want them to or not, which has interesting storyline implications. Of course, obviously for lore stuff, I definitely make some recommendations. Hydrostatic, Interstellar Privateer, Mark 726's Lore Survival Guide, definitely check them all out. Okay, so this is why they're important. Who or what are the drifters? From in-game descriptions, we know that they're from wormhole space, that they're arising from the ruins of sleeper civilization. CCP Fawzi has commented in the Tweet Fleet Slack that they're cyber zombies, so whether they're transhuman or post-human, a long philosophical conversation. Also from the Inheritance Chronicle written by CCP Delegate Zero, we know that they might be emergent AI or others, or they may be the infomorphs of Second Empire Jove, which have been sleeping a millennia, effectively. Of course, as we know from that same chronicle, it may not be so simple, so who knows? And we also know that from their use of reactionless drives, from their stabilization of wormholes, from their creation of drifter boosters that resemble Inferno, that they're also taking on Telecan technology, which is, as was also revealed in Inheritance, sort of God-level stuff. So they will continue to be a powerful force and break rules that we would rather they not break. And lastly, we've mentioned, of course, the Second Empire Jove, and naturally enough, they are in fact specifically mentioned as inheritors of the ancient Jove legacy. Specifically with their name, Tyrannos references the tyrants that unified the Second Empire Jove and created the longest lasting, most powerful Jove empire. We get the impression that the sleepers are scattered and disconnected, and possibly the hope of the drifters is to unify the sleepers and create a powerful Jove nation again, which is a rather different state of affairs from current. Okay, so we know more or less who we are, or we have some information. Let's get started on how to kill them. I know, it's important stuff, right? The important thing to know about the drifter is that your average drifter is slow, soft, and weak. I say this for a reason. Spelling it out, they can be kited. It's actually not too difficult. It's usually not something that's advantageous, so it's not something people usually try unless they're going for something specific. Of course, they're also soft. ARC's standard doctrine, Caracal, actually has comparable, if not marginally superior, EHP to your average drifter, which is to say that they are relatively easy to pop, relatively easy to trigger their doomsday on. And this, of course, plays into later doctrines. And what's more, they're actually fairly weak. Okay, so they have a decent DPS, 1280, pretty good for a single battleship, but it's nothing compared to a gang, so it doesn't necessarily even take that much in terms of logistics just to tank their regular DPS. The implication here is that the difficulty in fighting a drifter isn't their general set of statistics. It's obviously the Doomsday. I know, right? Who'd have thought? And as we know, this is a 750,000 EHP single hit. It does have tracking, hooray, but most ships take it in the face and then promptly blow up, including Capitals, as we all famously saw in that scope video. But there are two ways of dealing with this. Who cares if it's 750k EHP if you're in a destroyer, or if you're in a Tech 1 cruiser? Obviously, the primary method of dealing with drifters is just to plan to lose the ships and have enough friends who didn't die that you can finish the drifter. It's pretty straightforward that way. Of course, there are other doctrines that use a ship that is able to take a Doomsday to the face and keep fighting. For obvious reasons, this isn't the dominant doctrine. So, what do these doctrines look like? Obviously, you either eat the Doomsday or you scoff at it. The two principal doctrines that eat the Doomsday, we see the disposable destroyer doctrines, principally used around Safazon, or also by the What Drifters Drifter Incursion group, and they use respectively coercers or thrashers. The idea being that, well, if a ship costs $1 million, who cares? You're probably going to use that much ammo anyway. So you trigger the Doomsday, you eat it, and you come in with proper DPS. Alternatively, if you're not in a situation where you can bring in a large fleet, or rather you don't have reships near at hand, the Arataka Resource Consortium usually uses caracals and scythes. The idea being that, sure, you lose one cruiser, but a Tech 1 cruiser is something that you can sneeze and get the value of. And the remainder of the fleet will be durable enough that it can finish killing the drifter. And it's obvious why we use this. Of course, I also mentioned Signal doctrines, and I will be referencing Signal a number of times. He's a master drifter hunter. His doctrines, to be honest, require huge cojones. And I say this specifically because he's a Spaniard. He's a wonderful fellow. But it does require that you bling tank fairly sturdy ships, and it also requires a fair degree of precision. Okay, so we have tools. Where do we use them? Obviously, as we see here, that's a drifter hive. Iceland for scale. You'll see over the line there's an avatar. Obviously, not terribly large with regard to the hive. Hey, look, hives. Obviously, the place we want to fight. What's interesting about them? Obviously, the hive itself is massive. It's actually quite pretty. It's the only instance of drifter infrastructure that we know of that's purely drifter and not co-opted sleeper. These systems are also where they're taking the salvage from Jove observatories. So presumably they're logistical hubs as well. And of course, this also happens to be the location that was seen in last year's Emergent Threats trailer, where we saw drifters salvaging sleeper corpses and reanimating them. So when I say that this is a logistical hub, it might actually be a production center for new drifters. We don't necessarily know, but we can certainly guess. Of course, there's also what we now know is called the Nexus, which is a massive spatial distortion. And when I call the hive pretty, if you've been on op, you know, it's pretty cool. But listening to comms, the first time people see the Nexus, there's either silence or cursing or what? This is being recorded, I won't continue. Anyway, of course, the discussion of the hive system wouldn't be complete without mentioning that the names for 4 of the 5 reference outlying fortifications. Outlying for what? We don't know. Could be a drifter capital system, it could be for sleeper space generally, it could be for Jove space. It's again one of those ongoing mysteries. Okay, so formatting, hi. Anyway, so you're interested in going to a hive, you have a doctrine, how do you get in? There are 100 wandering unidentified wormholes. They wander between any of 1,000 systems with Jove observatories. If you happen to trace a route between observatory systems and you find one of these beacons, you warp to it, you see a SIG, you'll notice that it happens to be the first letter of each SIG corresponds with the name of the system. So B735 is Barbican, C, Conflux, on it goes. And also for convenience listed are their wormhole types, let's say their system classes. Just to warn you, naturally, there are drifters guarding the holes. Just so you know. Consider a warm welcome. If you're careful, they warp off, they warp back, they jump the wormhole. There will be periods of time where you'll be able to slip in. Actually, our usual method is to use a mobile micro jump unit, hang out on it, wait for the drifter to go, pop over, hop the hole. It's fairly slick, provided people don't end up, bumping each other and going random which ways, which is honestly usually what happens. Okay, so you're in a drifter system. You see something like Barbican on the overview. I'm going to try to hit this fairly quickly because I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what you get. Obviously, if you need a little bit more guidance on hitting the hive itself, feel free to ask any of us later. So first step, you fight your way through the hive. Really quick. If you want a functional map of the sites, look up Drifter Site Overview. It was posted by Zimby Pred, one of my courtmates. It includes functional maps of all 5 of the hives. You can either go up one side or split and go up both. It's worth noting that there are currently alignment units on both sides that you will want possibly sequences from both. So you could possibly go up one and then reset and go up the other, however you want to do it. So you get the sequences, you punch the Hikanta, Hikanta Tyrannos being an extra blappy drifter because they weren't blappy enough anyway. And when you blap in, you'll get certain MacGuffins, which you then feed into things. And I use this term MacGuffin. Let me explain it because I'm fond of the word. It was a term created by Alfred Hitchcock for something that is the focus of a plot. So for instance, in the movie The Maltese Falcon, the Falcon is the MacGuffin. It's the thing that motivates people. It may not necessarily have any intrinsic value of its own, but it's given value by the actors in the story. It's what compels them. You could trade the Maltese Falcon with a very fuzzy cat, and it wouldn't matter. So long as people cared about it and wanted it, it drives the story. Similarly, we have a couple of strange things going on with hives that give us an implication that there's value there, that there's something interesting, but we don't know. And not knowing, we sort of have to go kill things and get things, because that's how it works. So that said, when you kill a Hikanta Tyrannos, you get an index for the next bolt in the sequence, you get a coalesced element BPC, and that's about that. I'll go into more detail. You also happen to get hive alignment sequences from the alignment units that I've mentioned. These are fed into a repository near a collapsed drifter Stargate, which we assume then is going to be aligned and go somewhere, which then leads into the question of outline fortifications and where would the drifters want to go and so on. And that's an ongoing question. We have no answers. There are pictures on now.eveonline.com of a K-space drifter anomaly, which looks like possibly these might lead to K-space. The system Malachur came up during our search. It might go to Jove space. Could be a test bed for player Stargate features. We honestly don't know. And unfortunately, we don't have any verification. We don't know what CCP's timeline is. So it's, as I said, one of those ongoing questions and one of those things that we constantly are hunting for more information on. So going back to elements and what that's about, I mentioned that the index you get from any given Hikanta Tyrannos is fed into a vault in the next hive. This is the cycle. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, you run a ring, read out to Sentinel, to Barbican, to Conflux, to Vedette, and back again. Each index gives you 10 elements. These elements are then used to build a coalesced element, which we assume is the central focus of the storyline. Assume. And there is also notably a remainder of elements, which implies that the unconsumed elements might still have value in and of themselves. But if there's any one thing that you'll take away from this, is that the Drifter story arc, such as it is, has a lot of unknowns for us at present. It's building towards something, but while we can tinfoil about it and it you've heard me on hydrostatic, you know I love tinfoil. We don't necessarily know, and not knowing, But moving forward, it happens to be when you feed alignment sequences into the repository adjacent to the Drifter Stargate that's collapsed, you also happen to get Drifter drugs, because they evidently want to reward us for this, because presumably they want us to align their Stargate. Totally a safe thing then. Also, you'll notice this wonderful little GIF of the anomaly that surrounds this collapsed Drifter Stargate, and it's absolutely massive. It's a skybox effect, and as said, the prettiest thing in Eve. So if you're into space tourism, do check it out. Yeah, onward. So no discussion of drifters would be complete without discussing incursions. And first I do want to offer props to the three groups that were principally running them. There was Dogma Project, which was started by Cineal, using his doctrines, and they were running privately. There's PNS Drifter Fight Club, run by Nava Evios, and Onslaughter from Pandemic Legion, assisted by various other ARC coordinators. And of course there's What Drifters, which was notable for being the only public group running Drifter incursions. It was started by Marathia and Beryl Slaniava, and it used disposable destroyer doctrines. Pretty cool folks, all of them. Cineal, as I've said, is lovely. These guys are fellow coordinators, so obviously I seem to like them or something. It's also worth noting that there was a fourth group, a Russian group, that attempted to use Cineal doctrines, and they ran into a series of unfortunate incidents with drifters, as happens. And after multiple days of this, they just are like, probably not worth it. Of course, while the Drifter incursions are currently inactive and possibly gone for the duration, the system that was used to create these Drifter incursions is still existent. And it's worth noting that this is a generalized incursion system that, digging around the data, they call the tail system. This is socketable, so it could be used with Blood Raiders, with Sleepers, with Rogue Drones. Obviously, CCP would need to be able to generate some content to fill this, but it's something that hopefully they will be using, possibly even in the near future, to spin more PvE content rapidly. And of course now some mechanical details. The incursions would expand or contract based on control. NPCs would be warping and fighting throughout the system, Drifters and Amar Navy. Once the control bar got to a certain point, there would be a massive final influx of NPCs of both sides fighting, and then the control bar would tick from 9% down to 1, where it would stay. At which point, if you ran a single other site, the incursion would be ended. So there wasn't a mothership site, as you would see with Sancha incursions, which means that they weren't farmable in the same way, which has been stated as one of the design goals for CCP. Of course, we talked about past and present, let's talk about future. There's the Arithmos Tyrannos, which is coming to wormhole space. It's currently on Singularity. The notable thing about this is that it might warp out of the site it spawns in, and then continue to hang around a wormhole for several days, just harassing the people there, and coming to the aid of other drifters that may end up spawning in other sites. So if you're not careful, if you're not actively hunting down the drifters in a high-class wormhole, you could end up with a full-on drifter fleet hunting you, because that's totally the happiest thing for a wormhole inhabitant ever. On the mechanical side of it, our knowledge is still limited. We know that it's intended to keep the interesting quirks of drifters, that it's not a glass cannon like other drifters. It doesn't currently have a doomsday. Seems on-drifter-like, but okay. Of course, you do need to point it with 4 points or more to ensure that it doesn't run away. Points in PvE? Okay. And it's also noteworthy that it salvages to sleeper loot. Let's say sleeper salvage. This is the first drifter to do so. It does have a different type ID from normal, so sleeper salvage won't be coming to K-Space. Unfortunately, for people that enjoy tinfoiling, it took the type ID associated with the huge sleeper wreck, which means we're not getting a sleeper capital ship in the near future. Sad panda. Of course, let's go further into the tinfoil territory. So on Singularity, we saw an event that seemed to be coming that had Jove DNA sequences dropping from drifters and seekers that could then be fed into a cold storage container in drifter wormholes at a Sisters of the flotilla that's been posted there. This was seen late February, early March. We figured that it was intended for the March release, but we think it was bumped in favor of the Valkyrie event. But those items are still in the database, which means that it might reappear. Of course, as with many things involving the drifters, we don't know the timeline. So that was the quick run of things. We actually may not have an amazing time. I'm going to say we have time for one question. So if anyone would like to go for it, raise a hand. And am I seeing?
Those SOE flotillas that are in the drifter holds, do they do anything, or can you do anything to them?
So the question was, the Sisters of V flotillas and the drifter wormholes, do they do anything? Can we do anything to them? No. They are very pretty, which is of course nice in its own regard. Unfortunately, my guess is that they were intended to prep for the event that was scrubbed, and they're keeping them around until they decide to do something else lore-wise with them. So currently it's just a useful waypoint, a place to gather the fleet before hitting the hive. So currently it's a tourism destination because of course Sisters are good on tourism. And no one's telling me to stop, so one more question.
We got time for four. Yeah, according to this thing anyway.
I'll run with it until they kick me out. So, anyone else? Another question?
If you decide you'd like to join the research and participate in the project, would you recommend that you do it on a character that you have that does not normally go in high sec?
So that's an interesting question, and there will be both the direct mechanical answer and the tinfoil answer. So the question was, do you recommend joining ARC or other Drifter Hive ops on a character that doesn't go into high sec? One, our ops usually stage out of a central high sec location just because it's logistically easy. Two, currently, drifters do not seem to care about standing. I say this as someone with neg 10 standing to drifters. They seem to ignore me. That said, they are adding additional functionality to the AI constantly. It would not be surprising if at some point they decide, oh hey, let's keep shooting those people that keep shooting us. That's a great idea. So my only hope is that if they do enable that they will provide some way for people who are really keen on not being killed by drifters to engage in an amnesty. But that's a game design thing for a feature that hasn't been announced, so
Was some talk about the standings systems in Vegas, about patrol groups going and kill for any NPC faction going and killing people.
yeah, so sooner or later standings will in fact matter in a much bigger way, but So another question. Okay, there are lights in my eyes, so I might be missing a hand, or oh, I see pointing and waving. Okay, you'll have to speak up though. Please go for it.
The drifter incursions on AC5 and C6s, is there any word on how long they'll last? We're already planning on whether we can seed people's systems with C5 drifters wandering around just to annoy them. How long are they going to live?
Okay, so the question was on the longevity of drifter incursions, and I'm assuming this is the defensive...
wormhole ones.
The wormhole ones. So CCP Fozzy's made a variety of statements about his intent with this, and the idea is basically to ensure that they hang around as long as is mechanically possible without causing the server to catch fire. That wasn't exactly his statement, but I'm reading into it a little bit, and I assume that's the limiting factor. So it sounds like 3 days is sort of what they're currently thinking is a nice duration to toxify a system with drifters, but not make it uninhabitable for years on end. So, anyone else? Wave at someone, point at someone if they're raising a hand. I'm not seeing it.
Bueller.
Yeah, okay. In which case, oh wait, a hand. Go.
Let's pretend I know nothing about drifters. When you're going into the hive, I mean, how kind of large group are you taking?
We've run with groups caracals of various sizes. This is assuming that you're going with an arc-style caracal and scythe doctrine, not counting ancillary characters like hackers or couriers or link ships. We've run with as few as... We've run with less. We've run with like...
Scouts.
What's
Back
that?
18 was Scouts.
With scouts, but I think we've run with 14.
Back
including
before
ancillary.
the locks were removed, you had to run with like 20 because you had to go up each side. Now that the locks are gone, you can go with quite a bit less. You basically just have to be able to tank the drifter and survive about 4 or 5 doomsdays total to survive.
You know, it's a thing, surviving doomsdays.
Or, feed enough ships to 4 or 5 doomsdays.
Yeah.
So
that you can have a fleet that's beat down a bit but still kill drifters. Generally useful. But yeah, so we usually like to cap out high 20s is of course the point at which you're just sort of merrily coasting through and blacking drifters left and right. Down as low as like 12 to 14 is the point where you can make it in. But towards the end it's like, are we going to run into 2 more or 1 more? Because, so that's about how the counts go. Go for it.
So along the same line of not having done much with drifters, what is the cycle time on their doomsdays?
So if you don't happen to blap them in 20 minutes, it will reset. Which actually brings me to a point about the Arithmos Tyrannos. What we had
30 minutes.
seen / heard
30 minutes.
30
minutes.
for the doomsday recycle time?
Yes. The time to fire is 5 seconds. The lock break is instantaneous. So you have it breaks. You break the shields. You have 5 seconds after that, and then you get doomsday.
Okay, so 30 minutes. I was thinking the doomsday recycle time was 20 minutes, which is still long enough to kill them without issue.
I mean, if you're taking 20 minutes to kill a drifter anyway, you've got some other problems.
It is most certainly that. It is worth noting that CCP Fozzie has indicated that the concept for the Arithmos doomsday is that it will be a faster cycling, lower power doomsday. So it'll be a bit more of a solution for fighting fleets like we use, rather than, oh hey, I want to wreck a carrier. So hopefully that helps. Next question. Is that a hand?
Is there a simple answer to why you ended up with shield doctrine over armor?
Mostly comes down to DPS and missiles.
I like my answer. Because Caldari is great.
Oh yeah, Caldari is great. Also, the caracals actually are incredibly versatile. And the one wormhole where you'd think a shield doctrine would be terrible, which is the Wolf Rayet, the Wolf Rayet also boosts the rapid light missile damage, which means, okay, we have less resist, but we happen to have 50% more DPS, well, technically 44%. So it balances out very nicely, and they happen to work perfectly through all of the wormholes that we might use them in.
The lack of tracking is helpful too.
Yeah, it also helps that they treat drifters like chubby frigates instead of as difficult to hit things, and rapid lights really like chubby frigates. So, go for it. Oh, yeah.
You said there was resistance holes. What are they?
Yeah, sorry, I may have failed to mention that. So, in shield, there's a thermal hole. In armor, there's an EM hole, which is notably different from most other types of NPC. Most of their EHP is in armor, so usually if you're choosing a single damage type, I recommend EM. So, which is why we usually use Mjolnir, because it's perfect for it. So.
Okay, so given that the cycle time is about 20 to 30 minutes on the Doomsday.
On the Doomsday, yeah.
In theory,
if
you found one of these lone drifters floating around in high sec,
yeah,
you could go out there, get blapped, and then come back with something bigger and chew it out.
That would be a disposable destroyer doctrine. So
They
one of the
call for backup. They
In-
do call
in
for
high
backup.
They do call. Okay, so here's an interesting mechanical thing with circadian seekers that you see in observatory systems. They wander around, they do their thing. If you blow them up, they might be reinforced with more circadian seekers or drifters. When drifters get shot, they're usually running around in pairs anyway, so you would need to trigger both doomsdays because once you land and they engage you, if it's 2 drifters, they've got you with 10 points right there. That can reach up to 250 kilometers, not insignificant. So against a lone drifter, yes, the reinforcement functionality.
I have seen it on Drifted before, when we were using our pulse to blow them up, which is a thing.
Yeah, of course, obviously you can use capitals, you can use pauses to kill drifters, but usually if you're, wandering around high sec, if you're going into a hive, that's not usually an immediate option. But pauses can be anywhere, and actually I suppose after Wednesday you could use citadels to blow up drifters too, because hey, most of the time you're going to be invulnerable anyway. Yeah, we can. So, I see a hand there?
Actually, I was farming them on my phone super path for a while after they first came out because hey, why not? And I think one of the patches about a month or 2 after they came out was drifters stopped following you to a moon or planet. So if you would go out and bait a drifter to walk it back to your pod, tackle it up and chew it up, but I seem to recall a patch note, and then the behavior changed with that patch note saying that they would no longer warp to moon grids or.
Interesting. Okay, that seems like the sort of functionality they would add to fix what would be effectively an AI hole. I know that some people have reported that they run away from supers. Obviously haven't been able to personally verify that, so mileage may vary. It is worth noting that at this point, if you attempt to bait a drifter and then draw it somewhere, you will need at least 5 warp core stabs per drifter. So if there are 2 drifters, you're not moving. Sort of hard to have 10 lows.
Do circadian sleep, or do drifters and circadian sleepers interact other than drifters defending seekers?
So circadian seekers appear to be sort of an autonomous drone probe sort of thing for the drifters. Drifters will reinforce seekers if you engage their groups and reduce them past a certain size. So, also it's worth noting that if you fight the sleepers in a drifter hive system, as there are also random other sleepers, you do get drifter standing hits just for killing sleeper drones. So, that's a thing. Anyone else? Okay, go for it.
Me?
Your hand was up.
Yeah, if you're in like C5 or C6 to steal some gas, can you actually spawn one of those
What
guys?
we've heard at present is that they're only going to be in combat anomalies, so it doesn't sound like they're going to be in data, relic, or gas sites currently, at least in terms of spawning. If they're already existent in the system, good question. I do believe that drifters will warp to random anomalies periodically, but I do not know if they will warp to signatures. Actually, I believe they don't currently.
I have had that happen to me.
You have
I've had that happen to me.
Oh.
Not recently,
They
but
warp to like combat flags in system to check it out.
Okay, combat flags.
So there was actually a pretty fun video where Black Legion was like fighting Brave, and a couple drifters warped in and killed Elo.
Headshot in FC is great, yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way to gain standings with them?
Not currently. It's been stated by CCP Affinity to be something that they would possibly like to do depending on how the storyline goes. I get the impression that they have some general sort of goals and ideas as to how it's going to progress, but they also want to see what interests players and what they have the development bandwidth for. So possibly in the future, there's also been talk possibly about player pilotable drifter ships, but obviously all of this would be far future if they even do in fact decide to prioritize it.
Corpses were standing.
That works. Okay, why not? Alright, anyone else? Go for it.
Your drifters walking around C5 and C6s, do they show up on D-scan?
That is a design goal. CCP Fossil said that there are some technical limitations that they need to overcome. He has indicated that they also want them to be combat probable, so that you can actually hunt them down aggressively as opposed to sort of going, well, let's spawn another site and see if we can get the fleet that's in system to engage us. So, any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands, and I was actually told that this would be a 30-minute presentation as opposed to 40 minutes. Not anyone stopped me.
It's an hour on the page.
I know, right? They keep telling me half hour. It's like, well, we'll work with it. So, last call. Any questions?